Goodbye, gender studies. New College of Florida has gone full-based, and it is rolling back its gender studies program. And this has, as you expect, this has generated heated discussion about, freedom of speech, academic freedom, things like that, from several sides, not just the left, but also from some people, in the center. But its board of trustees has decided to go forward and actually reshape the entire curriculum, throw away the gender studies programs, and provide basically a classical liberal education, which, if I could capsulize in one sentence, it's supposed to teach you how to think as opposed to what to think. And you would expect that all these gender studies and all these weird studies, they are telling you basically what to think. And they're telling you if you disagree with it, or you say anything that implies disagreement with it, you're a bad person. You're a guilty person. You shouldn't be allowed to breathe or something. And you shouldn't be allowed to run for office or something. You should constantly apologize. That's it. That's where it leads.
I'm sorry, Stelios. I'm sorry.
Don't apologize to me.
I felt the judgment of
Don't apologize to me.
years of Greek history falling upon me.
Okay. So, speaking of classical liberal education, visit our website, lotuseaters.com, and for £5 a month, you can subscribe to view all our premium content. We have all sorts of series, historical series, epochs run by Bo. We have Broconomics by Dan. We have Contemplations run by Josh. We have Comics Corner run by Connor and Harry. We have all sorts of stuff. And we have Symposium, which is a philosophy series that run by me. You can check the debate I had with Carl, debating classical liberalism. I think that classical liberalism can be saved. We are having a very lively and interesting debate. Maybe there's going to be a round two at some point. I know I get a lot of criticism for that, but I have also got some support, and thank you very much. By all means, just check it and let us know what you think. Right, let's go to our new link. Next link. Okay, so Christopher Rufo is basically someone who has written a lot of interesting stuff, and lately I've started reading what he has written, and I really like it.
I think he's been played a hand in advising Ron DeSantis in Florida about policy change that should be happening. He's also got a new book coming out, I believe, called America's Cultural Revolution. He spoke to Oron McIntyre about it the other week, which was very interesting. So Chris is an interesting guy. I don't agree with him on everything, but he has been a force for policy change in Florida.
And he has been involved into the New College of Florida and the Board of Trustees, which voted to abolish its gender studies program. Now, let's see what happened. Tonight, the New College of Florida Board of Trustees voted to direct the administration to abolish the university's gender studies program, becoming the first public university in America to begin rolling back the encroachment of gender ideology and queer theory on its academic offerings. The decision, sure to elicit a fierce response from left-wing critics, is part of a broader transformation. In January, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis appointed me and a number of other reformers to the New College Board of Trustees. He tasked us with a challenging mission to revive classical liberal education and restore the founding mission of the college, which had been established with an appeal to New College at the University of Oxford.
So they're going to go back to teaching Latin?
You will see. They're going to go back and teach the fundamental canon of Western civilization, and this is a good thing. Yeah. So instead of just saying we shouldn't read, Homer, ancient Greeks, Romans, and
no, let's do that. That's what we should be reading.
Yeah, that's exactly what they're saying. Now, let's continue. From the beginning, we knew that this assignment would involve more than a rebranding campaign. It would require an overhaul of the structure of the college and its programs. In our first months as a board, we initiated significant changes to the central administration, firing the president, replacing the provost, abolishing the DEI department, and hiring political veteran Richard Corcoran as our interim president. We got pushback, student protests, media condemnation, a disapproving visit from California Governor Gavin Newsom, but we patiently continued to work, deliberating over questions of governance and making hard choices about the college's future. Now, before I continue with this, it's really funny if you think that Gavin Newsom went there to protest against this instead of, for instance, trying to make California better?
No. It's very important that the streets of San Francisco be literally covered in human feces at all times. We wouldn't know that they're a progressive state if it wasn't literally covered in human filth.
Let's continue. These changes have already borne fruit. Interim President Corcoran has secured millions in new funding from the state legislature, launched an ambitious campus renovation plan, and recruited the largest incoming class in the college's history, putting the school on its strongest financial footing in decades. Now, I'm not surprised at all. Wokeness basically is funded by the state. And when you say no to wokeness, you have people flooding your department. So
it's an entirely top-down phenomenon.
Yeah. So go non-woke and you won't go broke. That's a good thing to get from it. Now, simultaneously, Corcoran has recruited a new team that is busy rebuilding the institutional capacity of the college, which had atrophied significantly under previous administrations, and designing a new core curriculum, which will begin with an immersive first-year study of Homer's Odyssey and continue to provide foundation based in the logos, cultivation of human reason, and techne, the cultivation of applied arts. So basically it says it's
That's very interesting, actually. It's
back
good.
to basics.
It's good to see them just saying that the first year will be studying the Odyssey.
Yes.
That's nice to see.
Yeah. Let's start when you're part of a civilization, and it's good to think of ourselves as parts of civilizations. And we are parts of several cultures, all of who, with it, when compared to each other, have different degrees of continuities and discontinuities. But broadly speaking, there is such a thing as a Western culture.
And there is such a thing as the Western canon, which is very important.
Exactly. And just reading and teaching the Western canon, that doesn't mean that you despise other, let's say, canons. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means that if you need to create the identity of being a bearer of Western civilization. You need to understand where a lot of good ideas come from. Why? Because those who neglect history, as the saying goes, are destined to repeat it. Wokeness wants us to forget history because it wants to portray history in such a bad light that we don't read it. It wants to erase history. It wants to rewrite history.
It wants to do both.
Hates history.
It wants to do both at the same time, which is always hilarious. And I know this is something that's very funny because it hits close to home for you. We're often told at the same time that the past was a horrible, barbarous, uncivilized, unreasoning place wherein people just worked off of their base emotions. They had no capacity for rational thought, and they were mindlessly bigoted for no reason at all times, in all places. And then yet at the same time, and this is the most frequent one, and I've even had this from a friend that I spoke to recently, we're told that the past was simultaneously far more inclusive and far more diverse than we were ever told, and that history has been whitewashed. For instance, I get a lot of the time with a friend of mine that, ancient Greece, and I'm sure you'll love this one, was far more inclusive to LGBTQ plus identities than anybody would ever dare to admit in these days, which is both false and also a complete rewriting of history. But at the same time, they would want us to believe, especially if you read the works of Aristotle, that it was at the same time as being open and inclusive, patriarchal and oppressive, because Aristotle made excuses for patriarchal rule and made excuses for slavery as well. So you've got to choose one. This is completely nonsensical and contradictory.
I want to make two remarks here, because one has to do with comparing, let's say, ancient Greece and ancient Rome. I think ancient Rome, in some cases, especially towards the end of the empire, was a bit more inclusive. I may be wrong, but I think
tends to be something that happens right before empires collapse.
If we compare the two, I think Romans were a bit more inclusive. I don't think Greeks were very inclusive in some cases. But the most important remark to make is that there are, I think, two mistaken approaches we can take to the past. One is glorifying it uncritically, and the other is presenting it as in the light that you said. The woke people
trying to manipulate for modern purposes.
Exactly. So, I regularly feel, let's say, really annoyed at people who think they've never read a book. Okay, they've never read a book, They've never understood the text. They've never bothered, and they say, okay, all these ancient the people, they were just ancient. Now, 2 centuries have gone by. 1 century has gone by. Let's say problems with particular regimes, and so those was 200 years ago. We don't care. Now it's 200 years after. That's entirely a wrong mentality. But I think, on the other hand, we shouldn't, let's say, glorify uncritically the past. And that is why I think such an education is good. Even if you want to criticize something, learn first what you're criticizing.
You have to put it in context of the time that it was before you can truly understand it.
The problem with woke, one of the many myriads of problems with woke education, is that it teaches people to completely emotionally reject theories and positions that they have never even understood. That is why the curriculum changes constantly. And they say, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do the other. We're going to cancel all these books because they are, let's say, racist or bad, whatever, or patriarchic.
I saw them try.
They are saying we shouldn't read them, so people don't bother to sit down and understand the history of, let's say, Western culture, but also understand what it is that they're supposed to hate. Wokeness is, in education, it just says, you're supposed to go boo now. Never mind why. Just trust me, bro. Okay? Trust me, dude. Trust me, dudess. You're supposed to go boo. You shouldn't even read what you're supposed to hate.
I saw them try to, on Twitter, there was some lefty trying to cancel George Orwell most recently, because in the 1940s, before he passed away, he'd been passing on names to the British government of anti-British communist spies that were operating within England. They say, oh, he's just a complete evil right-winger. He's a white nationalist because he wanted to support the country that he loved.
Yeah, George Orwell, far right, yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that's
the avowed socialist George Orwell was far right, yeah, sure.
In total, 36 professors have exited, clearing the way for a large number of new hires interested in pursuing the great human questions rather than maintaining a stifling left-wing echo chamber. The college's new cohort of scholars boasts PhDs from institutions such as Harvard, Stanford, Princeton, and Northwestern. More importantly, all these professors share a commitment to classical liberal education, which prioritizes the pursuit of the true, the good, and the beautiful, that's so Platonic, over the deadening bureaucratic trinity of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I think that's good news here. Now, Chris, Rufo has been criticized.
You had to bring up reason, didn't you?
Yeah, because I want us actually to make a conversation here, to have a conversation here about what many people who claim to be classical liberals protest with this effort. And I do count myself as a classical liberal with, let's say, conservative social values. I don't think it is. So I'm going to show what they say against this thing, and I'm going to say why I think that it shouldn't be the case.
I would call reason, what would best, maybe John Stuart Mill classical liberals, which is that they support classical liberalism so far as it allows them to subvert traditional values.
Wow. It says, in an essay published this week in City Journal, that was March 2023 of this year, conservative activist Christopher Rufo argued that universities, or rather the state legislatures governing these universities, should shut down activist academic departments. But rather than protecting higher education, forcibly shutting down left-wing academic departments would be nothing more than routine censorship. Rufo argued that conservatives don't have to sit idly by while activist academic departments that push left-wing ideology in the guise of dispassionate scholarship grow at American universities. The activist disciplines are not inevitable, and decline is always in part a choice, one that can be reversed with sufficient courage, insight, and will, as Rufo says. But let's see how the article continues. But Rufo is plain wrong, they say from Reason.
Okay.
Both in his legal argument and in his appeal that academic censorship can be justified as part of the normal course of the business. The argument is incorrect. Professors are not mouthpieces for the government. For decades, the Supreme Court of the United States has defended professors' academic freedom from governmental intrusion. Joe Kahn, legislative and policy director at the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, FIRE, tells Reason. Now,
I mean, that's just wrong. I'm sorry, if you actually still believe that, you've not been paying any attention whatsoever. They are given public money, which is taken through taxes collected by the government to do courses which are regulated and funded by the government. If they are not doing and saying what the government wants them to, then they are not able to maintain that funding.
Yes.
This is just absolute rubbish. This, and I'm not entirely always against libertarians, because I know Reason can be a libertarian publication. They have done some useful work and some useful research in the past, but they are the kind that they're the kind of libertarian classical liberal that whenever any kind of effective political action can be done and is done, they are so affronted by the idea that you can do so, because they are so terrified by the idea of exercising any level of political power that they immediately run away from it, and they're more than happy to allow politically biased professors to run rampant over institutions purely off the basis of, well, I don't want to do what the left does. Well, I'm sorry, in that case, you're just going to sacrifice your entire civilization for the sake of a malformed principle.
Yes, and what I want to say is that this here is either arguing in bad faith, but let's say I presume that this is not the case, to make, let's say for the sake of the argument, to make it a bit more interesting. Or it's just entirely living on another planet. Mm-hmm. Okay, I think we're in agreement here.
I mean, the Civil Rights Act would immediately disbar anybody from teaching anything that the government decides is discriminatory.
What I want to say is that the model that these people are using is very reductionist. And you could say it completely takes community and our social situatedness out of the equation. And this is something that every time any person who advocates for a political position does, they're not going to have any strong chance to actually realize their ideas. They will lose. So we need to remember that, for instance, any kind of speech, any kind of, let's say, teaching, or any kind of course occurs within a society with particular cultural tendencies that occasionally conflict. And this is something to be taken into account. But what makes me say that the people who say these things are living on another planet, especially when they say, for instance, our nation is deeply committed to safeguarding academic freedom, which is of transcendent value to all of us, and not merely to the teachers concerned. That freedom is therefore a special concern of the First Amendment, which does not tolerate laws that call a past of orthodoxy over the classroom. Now,
I'd like to know his position on prayer in classrooms.
You cannot, but that is the issue here, that you cannot say that you're safeguarding academic freedom when you are giving a blind pass and you are sabotaging people who try to do something about a movement that actually destroys academic freedom. Who silences academic freedom? If you have anything to do with universities, if you have if you have any remote idea of what is happening in contemporary Western universities, you will see that basically there is a kind of atmosphere that is being imposed on students, particularly center-right and right-wing, and they're afraid to speak up.
I mean, it's not even...
They're afraid that they're going to be marginalized. They're afraid that they're going to have to resit the class and pay for an extra £50,000 per year in the US, or less in some other countries, because the US has incredibly expensive
universities.
Yeah.
It's not even just in the US or in universities. We've covered before, there was the case in Scotland where two students had disagreed with her professor's, her progressive teacher, and there was the recording of the teacher screaming at them and saying that they were being bigoted and uninclusive for disagreeing with her conclusions.
And because I want to go back to what I said before, that this model, that many libertarians are using, is very reductionist. And I say this, because I do like a lot of what libertarians occasionally say, but here they're just wrong. Just wrong.
These are the kinds of libertarians that Rothbard would have called left libertarians or modal libertarians, who he wasn't a fan of. These are the sorts of people that, say somebody comes up to you in the street and starts punching you in the face, and you defend yourself. They would turn around and go, "No, you're just as bad as he is."
The issue is that, as we have discussed many times, there is such a thing as what we call value pluralist liberalism, and that is, let's say, it's an umbrella term of positions that are associated with classical liberalism, where you can have a whole host of values. You could say liberty is a fundamental value, but there are other fundamental values, such as national identity, national coherence, national sovereignty.
Peace and order in the streets is something that I consider
security,
fundamental to my own liberty.
Exactly. So you need to make a comparative judgment of what is going to happen if you don't try to combat wokeness in university, and what happens if you do. So the problem is here that what many times libertarians neglect, but classical liberals, they don't have to neglect, or some libertarians, you could say, that don't have to neglect, is that we are always members of a society, and any kind of argument and any kind of human interaction occurs in society. And within society, we have all kinds of sources of power who are trying to increase their power and decrease the other. So, for instance, there's a very big classical Republican liberal tradition, for instance, in the US. You cannot say simultaneously that you're a part of that tradition and neglect the fact that, for instance, there has to be all sorts of institutional checks and balances and clauses that try to prevent, let's say, power from becoming imbalanced and from having for instance, particular center of power becoming too powerful and destabilizing the rest. And what wokeness does, in a nutshell, is it destabilizes communities. It destabilizes the population. So there needs to be some care for increasing the power of the people and rolling back the powers of an increasingly centralized state. And a means to do that is to actually counter these ideologies in the university.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Before you can even think about doing that, first you need to exercise political will and power to be able to turn all this stuff around.
Yes. And one thing to say is that everything can backfire. There is no panacea. There is no, let's say, golden, no solution for everything. No.
Well, this is the classic Thomas Sowell line. There are no solutions, only trade-offs.
You could say that, yes. And I think that this kind of mentality here, expressed by those on reason, is actually sabotaging the attempt.
Oh, yeah.
Sabotaging the attempt because
they're internal saboteurs.
Yeah, because, okay, let's say we get something like the non-aggression principle that many libertarians have. The question is, when is someone assaulting you? Okay, at some point, you will have to defend yourself, whether individually or as a society. If you constantly try and say, no, but actually what people are doing you, when they hit you, it's not really aggression. When they're stealing you, it's not really aggression. You should basically give them a blind pass.
If they're stealing your tax money and then turning it around to brainwash your children.
Aggression. Yes. So this is something that is, I would say, unintentionally for most libertarians. Maybe some people pose to be or not. It could be intentional. It seems to me that this is sabotaging the attempt, because we must never neglect the environment in which things are happening. The cultural...
This is the problem that I have with basing your principles of society off of purely a priori deduced principles in the first place, because it will always come down to the quality of the deduction that has been made.
I think they have a place, personally speaking.
They have a place.
I think they do, but they're not the only thing that matters.
Yes.
It's fine to say that we need some level of abstraction, because you cannot govern a society and impose a particular order on society without a degree of abstraction. But this abstraction is not the only thing that should be on your mind. You should also exercise judgment and actually look upon society and what is going on. Why? Because then actually you will see whether what is happening counts as, for instance, aggression or not. You will see if this counts as destabilizing the people's power or not. You will see if this is something like increasing the power of the state to increasing the state beyond the consent of the governed or not. You cannot see that without exercising judgment. You need both judgment about particular cases and a degree of abstraction. Just hiding behind abstractions is too reductionist, and it could sabotage good attempts.
Thanks for watching that segment from the podcast The Lotus Eaters. I hope you enjoyed it and found it informative. If you'd like to support the work that we do here, then you can subscribe to our website for as little as £5 per month to get access to all of the work that we have on there, including the most recent interview from Carl, where he's talking to Thierry Baudet and John Laughlin about the future of liberal democracy. If you'd like to catch up with what Carl is doing on a day-to-day basis, you can follow him on Twitter at Sargon_of_Acad and on Getter at Carl Benjamin. Thanks again for watching and take care.